climb the mountain, sail the stormy sea. I will fill up the fountain for the ones I'll never see. And they can't keep all those tokens and those bitter pills of shame, because the chain remains unbroken as long as events like this remain.
The birthplace of Dylan Thomas for the first live event since lockdown. So there's no wonder we're getting a few gremlins in here. They've been living here for the last 18 months. We've got a varied programme for you tonight. We have the launch of Pamela Petro's book, The Long Field. But first of all, we have some music from Ron Savary, and then some poetry from Dominic Williams. So I don't think there's anything more I need to do but to introduce Ron, and Ron will kick off the evening. Thank you, Ron.
Oh dear. Where's my line? Where's my line? That line there. That's a good line, Jen. Yep. Yeah, good, good. Good evening.
Good evening.
You see, because if we don't hear your voice, they don't know there's anybody here. I could be in a room empty playing to myself. So can we have a big cheer? 1, 2, 3. Yay! I love a good live audience. Now this side of the room were really loud, but it was a bit muted, the cheer on this side. So what we've got to do is we've got to make sure, you know, you're team A. Team B are nailing it. If this was I'm a Celebrity, they'd be in the royal dungeons and you would be the serfs. But here's the thing, you see, because one of the things that improves everything is that inbuilt ability that Dylan had, which was to have total self-confidence in yourself when others doubt you. So that's what this first song's about. Now, to get the audience participation element out of the way, and not to exert too much pressure on this cold night, all I'm going to need from you is an ooh at the appropriate moment after the trick. Would you like to see the trick? Yeah. Nods. The camera can't pick up nods. Okay, so we'll go for the trick. I've overcooked this trick now. Ooh. Thank you, Dominic. Oh, Team B, see. So when somebody tells you, you know, oh, just stop, you shouldn't do it like that. I wouldn't do it like that. This song's for you. You're throwing coins in lucky fountains. It isn't working anymore. And even though you're climbing higher mountains, you find your feet still stuck to the floor. If people tell you that you're crazy, or tell you where you're going wrong, just carry on. Just carry on. Ooh. Fantastic. They're catching up, Team B. You're up your game. So if light could trickle from the fountain, you're not sure where you should go, be like the leaf that falls into the autumn breeze, and with that flow just always go. If people tell you that you're crazy, or tell you where you're going wrong, just carry on. Just carry on. Oh yeah, no matter what anybody says to you alone, you've got to fight for what's right, never lose sight, never lose sleep in the middle of the night. All you gotta do is carry on. And if people stare, just don't care, pretend that they're not there. All you gotta do is just carry on. If people tell you that you're crazy, where you're going wrong, just carry carry on. Oh yeah, no matter what anybody says to you. The problem I've got is how do you end a song called Just Carry On? Oh, I know. Just do it suddenly. Thank you. Strange times. Karma, you are such a bitch. The poor get poorer, but the rich, they're gonna stay rich. What was it my mother always said to me? You'll always reap what they sow. Now everybody has a favorite disease. It's funny how they always spread with such ease. But even now, down on her knees saying please, still they'll say no. And I always knew there would be days but I never knew that it could last for years. Now, too many tears are falling down, and I'm still left wondering what's coming next. Too many tears are falling down. So karma, you bitch. The poor are getting poorer, the rich are staying rich. Don't even bother asking. There's nothing left to itch. It's been thrown away. They say everybody has one song or one poem or one book. 3, I believe. 4. Some of us have 4, some of us only have none. If I've got one song, this is it. I wrote this song 5 years ago, and like any song, it was more a kind of an attempt at maybe what was coming, but it certainly found its feet. This is more a plea from me, really. I'd like to thank everybody tuning in. I'd like to thank you all in the room. Sorry, it's very strange with 2 audiences. This is what needs to happen, really. This is called Each and Every Day. Each and every day. Each and every day, you know, I feel a bit colder. And each and every day, you know, I get a little more confused with what I see. And each and and every day. Each and every day, you know, I get a bit older. Each and every day, you know, I see a little less love in the world. But you see, if you only knew, you know that I would really much rather be. I'd be the first in line, the last to leave, the one who wears his heart on his sleeve. You know, I'd be that dry umbrella to shelter in the rain, and I'd be that hungry heart to eat all your pain, because there's no one else that I could ever be. So I'll just be me. Hello, little boy. Keep on fighting. I will climb the mountain, sail the stormy sea. I will fill up the fountain for the ones I'll never see. And they can keep all those tokens and those bitter pills of shame, because the chain remains unbroken as long as events like this remain. And people coming out to support live music on a cold day. Thank you very much, each and every one of you. And you can climb up the mountain, you can sail the stormy sea, and you can fill up the fountain for the ones you'll never see. And they can keep all the tokens and their bitter pills of shame, because the chain remains unbroken, while faith and hope still remain. So you see, each and every day, each and every day, though I get a bit older, each and every day, you know, I find a little more love for the world. Find a little more love, find a little more love, find a little bit of love. Lennon got it right words years ago. Find a little more love, find a little more love, gonna find a little bit of love. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure and absolute privilege now to welcome a very dear friend, a man with shirts that can only be described as, each and every one of them, a performance in themselves. Please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, home, and ladies and gentlemen, here, Mr. Dominic Williams.
Welcome to the Birthplace, Pam.
Thank you.
There are two people in this room that I spent time in Ireland with. My good friend Ron and also Ewan. And this first poem, strangely enough, Ron and I performed several times while we were in Ireland. I guess it could almost be called Dominic's Irish poem. And the main protagonist is my friend Ewan Barber.
Serendipity.
What did it say?
I never leave now.
The woman waits 1,000 years born, has flowed through Laurentine flows. The sage, the seer, nursed 1,000 siblings of a species long since displaced. A sacrificial spouse cracked open a womb that spewed east. But migration matters no more. The stars navigate no longer. Supernovas, but moments, foretelling the arrival of a significant one, for the land to welcome home her sun-kissed litter. The vessel now at shrunken rest, matriarchal in urban anonymity, within a gift, a symbol veiling an epistle marks this rebirth. An installation, water-sealed and hard-knuckle woven, tough branches of rebellion bent and interlaced to bear safe a positive force. The power of a creative thought, consummated at this predetermined time, in this predetermined place. The Berber flees, unsettled and unsure, carrying his name in his heart, an isthmus looking for land, sailing mechanically propelled, pursued by lens and light, to a darkened alley, destined to document his significance. From the south, rushing shores, superficial trade. A man laid naked, epiphany, an unknown return. And she who'd waited, she dances like a child. Okay, so Ron very kindly accompanied me reading that poem in one of several collaborations that we do during our time in Tramore. And this poem, I can call a Hiraeth poem. This poem was written about that trip to Tramore and the festival where we played. And I realized the poem actually ends with the word Hiraeth. But I realized after listening to Pam what type of a Hiraeth it was and what it was for. You will work that out yourself later when you listen to Pam. I have found your absence in the gentleness between moments. I have heard your gaze in the brown warmth of Irish sun. I dreamed you real in medieval verse, then surrendered my passion to you in every tongue's syllable offered to the bawdy Atlantic. In the soft cloud vapored on the sky by Icarus' fall, I prayed your slender limbs and spine. I will curve and line you with my palms. I will kiss your land undone. Breathe every touch of cotton and yarn from your skinscape. Shiver you, tongue-tip sentenced. Vowel every rosebud, flesh, heart, blood, stiffened by my song of angels' worship. Delicately echoing the rolling white force that mists Tramore with a summer's Hiraeth.
Oh, well, thank you, Ron and Dominic, for the first half of our programme today, ending with Hiraeth. That's a very appropriate spot because I think we're going to learn a little bit more about Hiraeth in the second half. And that's going to be
Well, welcome back to part two. It's me here now. Jeff's welcomed everybody at the start, and a massive welcome to Pam. And I should actually say, croeso, Pam.
Oh, diolch. Dwi eisiau dweud tipyn bach o eiriau yng Nghymraeg I ddweud diolch a Jeff, Alun, a pawb, yeah? Am gael bod yma heno.
Diolch yn fawr. That's
Oh, yeah.
superb.
Croeso. Now it's Saesneg.
We turned to, yes, no, it's Saesneg. Yes, absolutely. Or maybe a bit of Welsh and English back and forth together. Who knows? Yeah, we're going to be hearing a lot about Pam's story and the fact that she's obviously from the USA, but just greeted us in Welsh. How did that come about? These are some of the questions that we will be talking about today, going on a journey, not just the one from the States to here, which is very appropriate actually. Just a quick aside, because we're in Dylan's birthplace. Dylan was born in the bedroom upstairs there in 1914. And today, Dylan's wife, Caitlin, on this day in 1953, was also going on a journey. She was traveling from Southampton to Larne with her husband in the coffin alongside her, because he had died in New York. And the ship, the SS United States, got into Southampton yesterday, as it were, and then she traveled from Larne to here. That's not the kind of journey we're going to be hearing about, but that is appropriate. Yeah. We're not going on that road, but it is worth noting that that's part of Dylan's story that happened on this particular day. Now, Ted.
So I am here.
We want to hear about the impact that Wales has obviously had on you, but I want to start with maybe the most important impact of all. Can you tell us the impact that Wales had on your hair?
Yes, because nothing really matters more than that. I always had straight hair, and it was a bane of my life. But I came to Wales, and I talk about this in the book. This is how he knows this. And it started to curl, and it was hygroscopic. It absorbs hair apparently. In the moist air, absorbs moisture, but not uniformly. And so some pieces lighten and some get heavier, and that's what accounts for curls. And my hair curled.
There we
for
go.
the first time. And boy, was I happy. Yes, and that led directly to this book.
Yeah, there we go. We've started with the most important influence effect Wales had on you. But moving on, it's called The Long Field. And I think the place to start is, where is the long field?
That's a great question. That's that's the beginning. The long field is what Meta Elfyn introduced me to. Meta Elfyn, the Welsh language poet, is a good friend, and I invited her to come to Smith College to give a poetry reading. And she did, and she said, she started off, she was going to read a poem about Epent, and the removal of the villagers on Epent Mountain during World War II, when the British Army confiscated it for target practice. And she said, but I want to talk about Hiraeth first. And she said, I've been reading a book on etymologies of place names, and my favorite one is Hiraeth as a place name, which means a long, vast tract of land. And she said, let's think of Hiraeth as a long field. And at that point, I'd been struggling to write this book. This book took 7.5 years to write, another year to sell, another year to produce and edit, and that was an intense process. But at that time, I didn't have a title, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. I was thinking about Hiraeth. Hiraeth was already the focus of the book. But what was so great about it is that this happened in Massachusetts when she told me this. And when she said the long field, it brought me back in my mind to Wales, and really nailed this idea of hiraeth to the wet Welsh green ground, which is where my love of Wales came from initially. So I thought this is the perfect title. And a long field is what separates you, right? From you're on one end, and what you can't reach is at the other end of that long field. I thought a perfect emblem of hiraeth. So that's how the book came to be called.
Mm.
The
That
Long
really,
Field.
yeah, that was my response. That really jumped out at me
Oh, I'm
personally,
glad. I'm
because
glad.
it's a word I would have known probably since I was able to speak in what and familiar with the word and know.
Nice.
But then there are so many misinterpretations, and we're always told it's a word that you can't translate.
Into
For
English,
example,
right? No
into
cognate,
English.
except for Portuguese.
Yes,
Saudade.
Saudade,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
but that made me thinking of it in terms of a long field.
Mhm.
But until that point, then, what did you think hiraeth was?
Oops, sorry.
Let me grab my glasses before I step on them.
Yes, good point.
I dropped my glasses, people at home. Well, the way I saw hiraeth and thought of it was, it translates into English as homesickness or longing or nostalgia, and none of that felt like it was quite enough. Hiraeth to me is a longing for perhaps a place that's in the past. Perhaps that place is a structure, but perhaps what you long for there isn't so much the structure, but the person you used to be when you lived there. The younger person who had dreams that perhaps you fulfilled and perhaps you haven't. And perhaps it's those dreams that you long for, or the people you lived with, or the feeling of being at home in yourself that you may no longer experience. And it could also be that ideal dream that you're still seeking, that always keeps slipping over the hill, the next hill, which is, what the Welsh landscape, why the Welsh landscape is so important to me, because it embodies that sense. Go up one hill to see the horizon, but that horizon's already slipping over the next hill and the next hill. So to me, looking back, looking forward, seeking what's not in the present, I think of hiraeth, which is in the subtitle of my book, as the presence of absence, an awareness, an acute awareness of an absence in the present moment, be it a spatial or a temporal absence, missing a place, missing a time. The full title of the book is The Long Field, Wales and the Presence of Absence, a memoir. So that to me is the sort of white hot kernel of hiraeth, that sense of incompleteness in the present moment, the opposite of, say, hwyr, which is occupying the present moment, fully aware and absorbing that moment with soaring good spirits. Hiraeth is the opposite. It's looking backwards or forwards or around.
So what difference did understanding the word hiraeth through the interpretation of the long field, what difference did that make to you, not only in terms of understanding the meaning of the word, but to you?
To me, can I talk about Cwmdonkin? Or not ready? Not ready for that.
Take it away.
No. I mean, I don't want to.
No.
Okay. What made it so important to me is that when I came to Wales first in '83 and went to Lampeter to do the course, the landscape was a revelation. I had never, I'd seen rural landscapes, and I traveled around Wales, around Britain with my parents, through England and into Scotland and down through North Wales. But I came from a built landscape, a built world, suburbia of New Jersey, and it was houses and shopping malls and cars and streets. And we lived in a human world. I didn't ever feel even as a child, like I lived on the earth. I felt like I lived on top of it. And I had a sense of being in my time with my people, but nothing beyond that. And I used to like literally dig in the garden, like dig up my mom's flowers, looking for stuff, evidence that there was more to the world than just what I could see. And then I got to Lampeter and I went walking up into the hills, and what I saw was home, but not the home I'd come from, but the earth is home. And I saw how the earth had been made. From one hilltop, I could see how the glacier had passed through. I could see the way the river sculpted its way through and between the hills. I could see how one hill folded into another. And I had never experienced anything like that before. And it gave me, I think, the perspective I didn't know I was looking for, but that I needed to see the earth kind of like a legend on a map. And now I could read that map, and I could read myself on that map, not as a master of the environment, but as part of a continuum of deep time. And I couldn't articulate this quite this way, but boy, did it hit me. It hit me really hard. And this is just odd, but when I got to Wales, not only could I read the land, it was familiar. This is a place that I had always seen and known in my head. I had, with my eyes closed, behind my eyelids, I could see this landscape. And now, for the first time in my life, it was in front of my eyes. And Gillian Clark said, that's that. And she first told me, well, Cwmdonkin is the sense that a sheep gives her lamb. When the lamb is born, that this part of the hillside is yours. This is your anchorage. You're hefted here. But that didn't quite make sense at first. And then she said, or it's the sudden sense that you belong to a place that you've never been to before. And that blew me away. I learned this years and years after I'd had this experience, but Welsh had given me a word for what happened to me in Lampeter. And it was a first gift and then a second gift later in the language. So that's why the long field matters so much to me.
Cwmdonkin is one of the, again, is another untranslatable word like hiraeth. But Gillian Clark, I know, offers one version.
Oh, I know there are many.
And calls it the sheep walk.
Yeah.
In the sense of that's how far the newborn lamb knows
To go.
It can walk.
Yeah.
To be on his or her territory.
Yeah.
And so that sense of Cwmdonkin and hiraeth come together.
Absolutely come together, because when a gal from New Jersey, from the suburban world of New Jersey, comes to feel Cwmdonkin in Wales, that splits home like an atom. Because I cannot hold my glasses. Just leave them down there. Yeah, it splits home open, right? There are different definitions of home in the dictionary. One is the place you live permanently, and another one is the place where someone or something flourishes. And after I came to Wales in 1983, those two things split. And Wales became, I feel, the place I flourish most. But home, my address, was back in the States. And so Cwmdonkin ushered hiraeth into my life. And for a long, long time, it was a simple kind of yearning, not just to come back to Wales, but to come back and be the person I was in Wales, who I felt I left here. That someone who had a much more expansive view of time and place than I did before I came here. So those separate homes create, home for all of us is a sliding scale. It's not a place, it's a spectrum. And we're constantly shuttling between where we feel at home, where we live, what we remember. It goes up and down. And sometimes you feel more or less hiraeth.
James Baldwin in Giovanni's Room says that home is an irrevocable condition.
That's perfect. That's perfect. But it can be revoked. And that's a whole other story. That's not a very good story, but it can.
Yeah.
Do you want me to read anything or just?
I do. Can I just read something?
No, you
It's
can't.
one of the short.
Whose
Please.
book is this?
Okay. It's one of the shortest sentences, but I found it a really powerful one. So it ties in with you, right? It's at the end of the first section when you say, "Hiraeth doesn't make me Welsh, it makes me human."
Yes.
That's an extremely powerful two short sentences. Expand.
You expand. Yeah, that there's a Welsh language scholar named Robin Chapman who has said of Hiraeth, it is at once something very Welsh and a universal human experience. And I think that's absolutely true. When I conceived of this book, I didn't think about writing it for a Welsh audience. I thought about writing it for an American audience because that we're a nation of immigration, as many nations are, and as Britain is becoming more and more. And there's always that sense of home as being in America, not being temporary, but being ungrounded, that there's a deeper home somewhere, that if you can only get there, you'll understand something about yourself or where you came from. And I have a really dear friend who grew up in this big Italian family, and her grandfather was the patriarch of the family, and he came from a bucolic village outside Naples. And she grew up, and the previous generation grew up with stories about this village that was drilled into them. This is where you're from. These are where your roots are. And every one of those kids of both generations, the second and the third generation, yearn to go to this place. And they say, one day we'll go. But that village 50 years ago had become an industrial suburb of Naples. So there is no village anymore. There's the village in the mind. And maybe the village that the grandfather presented to them was never an objective place. Maybe it's his heart's village, right? So I wrote the book for Americans. I think that my compatriots need this work to understand our own experience, and then to understand the experience of exiles who are forced to leave home, refugees who are forced to leave home. We can empathize better with their experience if we can put a word on it. And we can say, they're experiencing Hiraeth, which is, there are gentle forms of Hiraeth, and there are violent forms, that when home has been pulled away from you. And critically, I think I should say this too, that the critic Edward Said has said that exiles have a hard time, but exiles live a contrapuntal existence. Most people have just one home. The exile has two. And that shuttling back and forth, not between place, but between memory and present, makes for originality of vision. And I think that this is a universal condition rather than a specific one. So I think we need Hiraeth to be human. And I think that I've read Doris Polk in her book on Hiraeth says, Hiraeth isn't a bad thing. Being de-Hiraeth that's what you want to avoid, because that means you're desensitized, you don't care, that you don't feel loss or pain or.
Now we can hear from the book.
Okay.
I'm now willing.
Well, I have I was just going to read a little bit about that Dom, should I do the?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. He knows what I'm going to talk about. This is just going back to that punch between the eyes encounter with the land. when I first came to Wales, and it's from a chapter on the miners' strike. I was here doing my MA in 1984, so it was the summer of the miners' strike. It was the summer of a really severe drought in Wales, and the book. This is another long story. We're going to talk about this. How I didn't want to be in the book. No, I can talk.
You can talk as your.
Anything I want. Oh, let's talk about something else. Let's talk about you, Alan.
Moving on.
Okay, more about me. Yeah, I didn't want to be in the book. I wanted to use Hiraeth as a spotlight to show Americans what Wales was, and to tell the Hiraeth stories of Wales. And agents just thought that was a really bad idea. I mean, nobody wanted to buy this book, and they kept bugging me and saying, "You need to be in the book. You need to be in the book." And I kept trying to say no, no, no. And finally, it occurred to me that I was absent from a book about absence. And I was casting Hiraeth as a national experience, but not a universal human emotion, or experience or state of being. So I very reluctantly entered the book. And what it is now is each chapter is a braid of a Welsh experience of Hiraeth, the miners' strike in this case, which had always been called, well, not always, but I heard it often in the press that summer, a slow motion train wreck. And that put me in mind of a train wreck that I had been in the States, one of Amtrak's spectacular crashes. And so that what I talk about is the Hiraeth for being confident of a future literally of being on a train that will pull into a station and you'll live to arrive, which I almost didn't. Or that you'll have a future in the profession that you trained to do, and that your family has always done, and that you fully expect it to continue in. So that's what. And to set this up, that's what the chapter is. But what I'm reading is I'm in the hospital recovering from the train wreck, and what comes on TV? How green was my valley? How perfect is that?
That would have sent me to relapse.
What a silly movie. Okay, so that's the lead-in. Hugh had his valley and I had my hills. I found them one drought-stricken early evening during the miners' strike. The day was warm and dry, more brown than green, still, silent. It was July. It would be almost 3 more months before the rains returned. I was feeling especially restless. The longer I stayed inside, stuck on a chapter of my dissertation, the more I felt a vacuum growing around me, sucking air from the room and my moral will along with it. Excuse me. The mismatched wallpaper in Dalware's living room, that was the cottage where I was living, throbbed before my eyes. I wanted to be outside under the generous sky. I needed untainted countryside and a big sky too, or I'd implode, or I would go to the pub too early. I drove to the western edge of the Brecon Beacons and parked at a trailhead along a 1-lane track. As I set off into the hills, the air was already growing damp as fair weather clouds stacked up in the sky. Ahead of me, the beacon's bald flanks were furrowed like elephant skin in clouded ashes of roses light. Despite the day's warmth, it soon became chilly, but the ground held its heat. The hills began to smoke with eddying bands of mist. They didn't glow green like Hugh Morgan's slopes. The drought had rendered them gray-brown, but it didn't matter. They slipped whole into my memory so that I can see them now as clearly as he saw his valley. That dusk was unspeakably beautiful and not a little illicit. It seemed for a millisecond as if I were witnessing the earth drop its guard and exhale its love for the sky, the pungent cattle, the rabbits whose frail bones crunched underfoot, and for me too. I felt as if my bodily fluids, my wet physiological self, were being summoned to high tide. The hills tugged hard on my blood, and it responded with a storm surge that made me ache. A simple sensation, more urgent and less complicated than thought. The love of one animal for another, or the love of an animal for its home. I'd let go of the brain static, which I was always complaining about, and momentarily connected to something primitive and essential in myself, something that harkens back to our vanished gill slits and tails. It is Cwmdonkin, not in the sense I first experienced it, that feeling of belonging to a place you've never been before, but in the older, other, mammalian sense of the sheep's ancestral knowledge of her home. 10 months in Wales, and I'd become the sheep. I felt excavated, mined, as if a hole had been bored by a love for this place straight down into the core of me. Yet, a small, cruel voice whispered, "This walk, these hills, soon all they'll be for you is memory, Pam." Saudade, the Portuguese sister of Hiraeth, is described as the love that remains when a place or a person has gone. This new hole is where it was going to live.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
You touched on a couple of things there. When I was reading this, for some reason, my mind was taken back to my Sunday school days, which are getting further and further into the past in more ways than one.
We're the same age, we just discovered. We're born just like 12 days
A
apart.
few days apart, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm older.
It shows.
Thank you.
But are you wiser?
I doubt it.
Ah.
A verse which doesn't happen often. There's a reference in the Welsh Old Testament that talks about Raf Trichordin, a three-braided rope.
Oh, wow.
And the Raf Trichordin kept on coming to my mind as I was reading the book, and that's how I ended up relating to the book. That's what we do. That's what you do.
How wonderful to bring that out, because I mean that is very much there is very much a three-part braid.
Yeah.
But that it brought you for you to like make that concrete in your mind, like the long field is for me.
Yeah.
You went to Sunday school.
Took me back to my
I love that.
childhood. Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a Raf Trichordin. And the three chords, I mean, we touched on one, which are the concepts of Hiraeth and Cwmdonkin. And then, as Pam has already alluded to, on which that reading shows clearly, there are specific events that happened in Welsh history, the miners' strike that you mentioned there. There are others that we might be able to talk about. Then the third braid is what you was just referred to, is the personal, in which you were very open, considering that you were very reluctant to put yourself in it. Once you did,
add it forward.
Absolutely, we'll come to that. Let's go with the events first. So
the book the book.
Yeah.
To write the book, you have to listen to the book. You have to stop listening to yourself and what you do want to do or don't want to do. And the book needed that, or the braid would have fallen apart.
Yeah, true. It would have been a half diagonal. Yeah.
And that's not a good one.
No, that's easier to break.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so.
So some of the events that you touch on, you mentioned the miners' strike, the drowning of Tryweryn. I'm struggling which one to choose.
Yeah.
The drowning of Tryweryn in Capel Celyn, Aberfan.
Yeah.
You mentioned as well. Why did you think that was important to bring those kind of events into the narrative? Epint Mountain, you've already mentioned.
Okay. Absolutely, because I think at its, as I see it, at its most elemental, Hiraeth is a loss of home. Like, as I said, home is we could call it homesickness if we really excavated what home means, all the different facets of home. But at its classic, at its most elemental, home is the place where you live. And to me, when I was in grad school in Lampeter, I read the Mabinogion for the first time. And there is a passage in Manawydan in the third or fourth branch of the Mabinogi in which 4 friends go, actually it's down at Narberth, they go and sit on a mound, the magic mound. And when you do that, you'll either receive wounds or marbles. And sometimes wounds and marbles are really hard to tell apart. And so they do. And there's a great thunderclap and the mist falls. And when the mist lifts, they're alone. They're existentially alone in the world. Everything, the scape of the land is gone. The scape, all the human web that we live in, home in a way. The human part of our homescape was gone. No animals, no other people, no buildings, nothing, just gone. And I read that and I circled it in red, and then I underlined it in yellow, and I didn't know why that was so important. And when I was writing this book and thinking about Hiraeth for home, I went back to that as the fountainhead of, it sounds like I did this logically. I did not. Mary Carr says, the American memoirist, writing is like being locked in a cage that's on fire. And that's just what it was like writing this book. But eventually, tossing and juggling all the balls, that was one of the big hot potatoes that I kept throwing around that story. And I suddenly saw that's a metaphor for the vulnerability of home in a colonized country, that things can be taken away. And that might be the mythological fountainhead, but the way that has been experienced more recently in our lives and our parents' lives are with the flooding of the Tryweryn Valley, the removal of the people on Epet Mountain, both Welsh speaking, Welsh culture communities that were dispersed, and it's still going on. And I talk about in a chapter on home, which I also weave my own home in, as where I grew up is totally different experience. I talk about hiking around Epet Mountain and being terribly aware of the artillery fire going on and walking into the danger zone and realizing that this is not a safe place anymore. And later, looking down on Google at where I'd been and realizing that Epet, the place that was once occupied by Welsh-speaking people, is now called Killianny, and it's the fake town that the military has created to do maneuvers in fighting in a built-up area. And the question became, how did we get from Epet to Killianny? What are the factors? And that took me back to Manawydan. And to be able to see, after all this juggling, the connections between ancient legends and myths to actual practice. I remember pulling this all together and thinking, this is breathtaking. This is tragic. This is Hiraeth on a huge scale over such a time in which nothing really changes. So it was terribly important to me to bring in concrete examples like this, to not just deal with legend, but to deal with reality as well. So that's just one example.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm still processing what you're saying. Do you want to take one of those examples? I mean, Tryweryn, what did that specifically tell you within the context of what you've just said, for example?
Well, Tryweryn is such a classic Hiraeth story. Gosh, the town that was there and then is now underwater. Excuse me. for me, the Tryweryn story was the lead-in the book. What I focused on was not the disappearance of home as built landscape, as a place and structures. It was the language that was spoken there, and the fact that language can be a home too. And it can be that maybe the language is where we stake our flag of identity. And so I looked at Tryweryn, tried to look at it in a slightly different way, as emblematic of not just the loss of actual buildings and places people lived, but the loss of language. And there's a chapter that braids the fact that a whole country has been separated from its language. Talk about a long field opening between place and the language that grew up in that place. There's an endemic Hiraeth in the air, always. And then I braided that into my experience of trying to learn Welsh, which was miserable, which I still need to. It's part of a long arc in which I'm still climbing one side of it. But I braided that into my experience as a gay woman, and my way of speaking a minority language is the minority way of loving rather than the minority way of speaking. And I always wanted to be an advocate for the Welsh language, like my friend Mena Elfyn was. But I slowly begin to realize in this chapter that I stake a different claim, and in a very, very difficult and painful way, because my partner and I are both, kind of quiet, private people. And our parents are both, our sets of parents who've both died now, were very conservative. And we didn't want to create a rupture in the family. And to stake that claim was very, very difficult. And we did it in a very understated way, which was very difficult as well. So that chapter is about the making of minorities, and how when something is perceived as a minority, Hiraeth is absolutely built into the equation, because you're separated from the ease of the majority experience.
At the crossroads now, we'll come back to that personal part,
Yep.
But this is a good place to bring the man who was born here
Yes, because he's in that chapter too.
into the conversation. Yes.
Yes, because Dylan, and this also opens the whole idea of creative Hiraeth. I'll just start with that, and then I'll come to Dylan. That my friends in Wales mostly see Hiraeth as a very negative thing. It's that undertow backwards into a past that the has been and never was of Wales, that we look back toward wistfully, and it saps our energy to create a new future. That's how Mena sees it. That's how a lot of people see it, and I think that's absolutely valid. But I think there's another aspect to it that needs to be acknowledged, which is the creative side of Hiraeth. If there's loss, there's absence. If there's absence, there's an empty space. And what do humans do? They fill their spaces. They fill them with invention, with creative ideas, with stories. The megaliths, that dance in the moonlight and on the beach in moonlit nights, right? We don't know what the megaliths were there for, but we make up stories by God. So Dylan, separated by well-meaning parents, just like mine, who didn't teach him Welsh, he was separated from his language. And yet, I think that separation, that loss that he was always living in, I think that spurred him to write in Welsh and English. You hear the Welsh in Dylan's work. It's not, the words might be English, but he created a whole new poetry to make up for what he didn't have. And I think that is just such a great example of what we do when there's loss. And Dylan is just a great exemplar of that. Yeah, it's just, I think that's wonderful.
That's fascinating, because when I do the tours here, and if people ask about Dylan's relationship with the Welsh language, as part of the answer, I always say that if I'm reading Under Milk Wood specifically, I'm reading Welsh, but in English, because of the rhythm and the pattern and the tones, and that's why the Welsh translation of it by Jim Jones is almost as good as the original, because the two are so because the two are so close together anyway. Yeah. I want to come to the third braid in the rope, which you've already started to open up on, which is the personal.
We have to go back to that.
Don't have to, but I'm going to ask you anyway.
Go for it.
No, because what I mentioned earlier really is that considering that you didn't want to put any of you in there,
There's a ton.
that you're really open and honest, which I think gives it a warmth that it wouldn't otherwise have.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, like I said, the book demanded it. And at some point, every writer of nonfiction has to make a decision. Are you going to write for yourself, or are you going to write in service of the book? And I put too much time and effort into this book. And when I saw what it needed, I had to become the servant of that need. And yeah, it was stuff that I didn't want to say in public, and you know, I worried what people would think. My partner read it first, and after, she didn't want to read it while I was writing it. She said, just read the whole thing and see how I feel about this. And she gave it her okay. But you know, yeah, I don't know if my parents were alive, if I might have made a different decision, and it wouldn't be the book it is.
So it wasn't easy.
So loss, in some sense, the loss of my parents, whom I miss every day, made this book possible. Reimagining not our relationship, but their loss has made possible a book about loss. And it's not just a book about loss, it's a happy book. Don't you think it's a happy
Absolutely.
book?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
I don't walk through it yearning. And
Yeah.
we get a joke all the time, because my partner is Brazilian and she teaches Portuguese and Brazilian studies. So people always say to us, oh, do you walk through your house longing and yearning for dinner? You know, I just see you lying on the sofa.
Right.
Having a pire, Sonny. And yeah, we get a joke about that a lot.
You come up with a lovely phrase in there as well when you talk about grappling with sexuality. And you kind of use the phrase "the gay knot."
Oh yeah.
As opposed to,
we don't wear gay knots. Yes.
as opposed to the Welsh
I
knot.
thought that was really clever.
It was.
And nobody else had noticed that except you. So thank you.
Hey, it shows I read it. Yeah, that was great. That made me smile, and it still does. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think we can wind it up. There's so many more things we can talk about, but there is one question that was going through my mind as I was reading the book, and you more or less kind of answer it before the end of the book, but I mean, I'll ask it anyway.
Sorry about that.
But, yeah,
I took your thunder.
that's cool. Home where you're born, home where you settle, home where you flourish, but maybe the idea of where home is where you want to be buried.
I see that as a post-human home, perhaps, without the awareness we have now. That's a home for, you know, there's a whole chapter about megaliths and parents and how people in stone have so many similarities. But that's in metaphor. You know, when you actually die, yeah, we're as I guess, I don't know, you know, the perception we have now is either different or not, no longer, it doesn't exist. And yeah, that's a different kind of home in the earth. And I think we all have not a longing for that, but hopefully that will become part of something else bigger. And the place I talk about is Pentra Yvonne. But that's where I would love to have my ashes scattered, but not on a windy day. I said the other day, I don't want to be in somebody's hair. I want to be
Here we
in
go.
the Priscilla Hills.
And we're back full circle, ending on hair as well, which is
There,
lovely.
how about that? I gave you a gift.
Happy days.
Happy
Nice one.
days.
By the way, I'll end just by quoting an Anglo-American poet, W.H. Jordan, a contemporary of Dylan's, who said that the best books are the books that read you. And this has been reading me.
Oh, what a nice thing to say. Oh, thank you.
Diolch.
Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch o galon.
Diolch i bawb.
Yeah. Da iawn. I was just going to say, and I was going to pick on you, but you beat me to it.
Yeah, it's well, I've been thinking it all through this. It's an observation rather than a question.
Oh, good.
Because I'm sure all the answers are in here.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
There's a quiz at the end.
it's like hillrise. It's and I agree. I don't think it's a bad thing, and especially if it involves creativity because of this filling this gap, something. And I've done paintings that are based on hillrise, and I have. You see, in Welsh, a lot of words can be separated into two. And so I've separated the word hiraeth into hir aeth, which is like long gone.
Long gone. Yeah.
Hir aeth. But it's a little bit softer than long gone. It's more, you know, the whole word is hir aeth. It's gone slowly a long time ago, you know?
Yeah.
So that was one way that I was dealing with that word. And another thing that I read and came across years ago and have used it as a quote many times is by an American anthropologist, James T. Clifford. And he has this memorable line in one of his books, can't remember which one. Perhaps there is no return for anyone to their native land, only field notes for its reinvention.
Is that where you got the title of your exhibition?
Yes, that's right. And field notes is what I consider my drawings and works to be, and probably all of the creativity that is based on that.
Yes.
These are field notes.
I love that. That explains so much. And yeah, it's all field notes, right? Our life is field notes.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Oh, thank
And
you
it's
for
strange
that.
that the long field, the field notes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And I should say, I'm really happy that I called it the long field because it got this cover. And I just love the cover. But yeah, you're right. I was aware of the hir aeth, and I think in this etymology that Nana found, aeth is suggested to be some very local word for field. Hir aeth.
And it has a link with the agriculture.
Yeah.
And myself, yaith, aeth on the end of the word.
Yes.
So that again,
It all works together.
and it goes back to the earth, to the soil, as it were, and back centuries. So it does connect in many ways. Anybody on Zoom with a question, Don? Just if we can.
Come on, Zoom people. Don't be shut out of the question.
Please, feel free to ask
like,
a question on Zoom. And in the meantime, anyone in here with a question? No, that's okay. So, okay, I'll pick on you again. I'm intrigued because you're known as Iwan Bala. That's your name. I don't even know what your actual birth surname is.
Well,
Actually.
only the police and my doctor
No.
use my real name.
We'll leave it that way then, shall we?
Yeah.
But you've just moved now to the beautiful Gwendraeth Valley, to Cwmdonkin, and called the house Adre, which is home. So your name goes back to where you're born. Your home is in Cwmdonkin. Is the Longfield between the two.
Well, it is, and home is where your heart is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Feel a song
But
coming.
I feel at home in Cwmdonkin. I do. And I don't know what it is. There's something about the place. As soon as I went into that house and saw a little piece of land I have, it's not a long field, but it's a long garden. And there's a studio that's I can work down there, and it's got trees and it's wild, and I just felt at home. And then Adre, which is what we would say in Bala is Adre in further north, and Penllyn, and they say Adra.
Oh, really?
And we say Adre, which is more of an E as you go further south to Machynlleth, where my mother comes from, Penno. There's even more of that thinning of the language. It sort of, changes. So yeah, Adre. And when I was young, I mean, I wasn't born in Bala. I was born in Sarne, which is 3 miles down the road, and then we lived in Gwyddelwen, which is 13 miles towards Ruthin, because my father was a headmaster of primary school, and so we moved to Bala when I was about 13. So I didn't have that sense that I was properly Bala, because I kind of moved there from somewhere else. So I didn't have that really. And then I spent so much in Cardiff. And
that's interesting, because that brings the point up that sometimes there is no one place as a starting place, and especially like I have friends who call themselves third culture kids, who grew up either with parents in the diplomatic service or the army, and told they're American, but never lived in the United States. And this one friend lived in Nepal, in Kenya, in Saudi Arabia, with time every now and then home. And she calls herself a third culture kid and feels at home in the in-between spaces. Like there's no, that she feels most comfortable not being comfortable, because that's her experience. That's her initial experience.
And of course, the quote I said, perhaps there's no return for anyone, because it's gone, isn't it? It's no longer there as it was.
No.
Even if it's not a cultural change, it's a different place. But it is a cultural change in Wales. And you mentioned Tryweryn, which was just up the road from Bala. But there were many other incidents like this. And one that pointed out to me was from the poem Rhyd Cymerau, villages were totally, and farms had to be abandoned and knocked down for huge plantations of trees, forests. And there's hundreds of farms just disappeared, and the community's gone, Welsh-speaking communities, because they covered the whole area in forestry. That's something that we don't hear so much about, But now, I mean, worse than Tryweryn is the fact that these villages are being bought up, and people can't afford, local people can't afford them. This is on a huge scale in comparison to a small village.
One small village, because it's happening everywhere.
But what I find intriguing with this is you bring up second homes now, and instantly it's a political reaction. Tryweryn would have been a political reaction at the time, but there's nothing political in the way that you deal with any of those incidents. It's more to do with
they're wrapped up in something.
Yeah, when you pick on something that's happened within the last 50, 60 years, it takes you back to the Mabinogion, not to which political party do I align this with.
Right.
And I think that's an important.
Because otherwise, you pinpoint yourself. The reader will say, I agree or I disagree. And also, it narrows and winnows down the experience to an immediate response, rather than opening it up to a more universal response. And that's what I kept trying to do.
It's like you say, Hiraeth doesn't make you Welsh, it makes you human.
Right.
It's about the human condition.
Exactly.
And
And I think that's what creative nonfiction should always do. That's what I try to beat into my students' heads anyway. They don't always listen.
No, I mean, this is what creativity is about. It isn't just, I refer back to the Mabinogion a lot as well.
I know you
It's a
do
treasure
in your work.
chest of things that you can compare and contrast to you know,
Absolutely.
situations now. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
but that's great. Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping my top my glasses.
Hello, little boy. Keep on fighting. I will climb the mountain, sail the stormy sea. I will fill up the fountain for the ones I'll never see. And they can't keep all those tokens and those bitter pills of shame, because the chain remains unbroken as long as events like this remain.